What is up, sysadmins? Back in October, VMware released vSphere 8. And in traditional form, we are going to be running through today an installation of ESXi 8. The very first thing that needs to be done is we need to head on over to myvmware.com and download the ESXi 8 ISO image. Once you've downloaded the image, it is going to look something like this. And we're going to be using that to mount into our virtual machine that you can see highlighted up on screen here. Like with all my lab environments, the way that I'm going to be installing this ESXi server is in a nested installation. So if you're just joining us for the first time and you're not sure what nested means, it basically means that we're installing vSphere within another vSphere environment. Now, I've already prepared this virtual machine. I've given this virtual machine 8 CPUs, 16 gig of RAM, and 40 gig hard drive. Now, if you're doing the same thing and you're preparing a virtual machine to install ESXi in a nested lab, there is one important setting that you need to turn on, and that is the hardware virtualization. So you need to tick that box that says expose hardware assisted virtualization to the guest OS. Before we close off this window, one other option that we are going to turn on, if we head on over to VM options, we are going to expand boot options. And then we're just going to go and tick during the next boot forced entry into the EFI setup screen. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want the boot up to pause. So it gives us a chance to mount our ISO image. Now our virtual machine is ready to go. We are going to go ahead, click on launch remote console. Once the console launches, we are then going to go ahead and click on VMRC, power, and power on. So now that we've got our virtual machine paused on the BIOS settings, we're going to go and click on VMRC. We're going to go to removable devices, CD DVD drive, and then we're going to select connect to disk image file ISO. Once that window pops up, just go and select where you downloaded your ESXi 8 ISO image to, and then select the ISO image itself and click on open. Now within the boot manager on screen, we're going to press the down arrow and we're going to select EFI VMware Virtual IDE CD-ROM drive and press enter. This is going to boot this virtual machine off the ISO image and start the ESXi installer. In a short while, you're then going to end up on the welcome screen. Here, we're just going to press enter. To accept the EULA, we'll press F11. ESXi has picked up our 40 gig local drive. That's where we're going to be installing it to. So we'll go ahead and press enter. I'm going to leave my keyboard layout on US default, press enter. Now let's type in something very secure here for our root password. Once you've typed the password in twice, go ahead and press enter. Now the system scan has picked up that the CPUs are not compatible with this version of ESXi 8. However, and miraculously, previous to this video, I did install ESXi 8 and it does work. But before you go out and buy any new lab hosts or any new hosts for your production systems or for your clients, I highly suggest that you go and visit the VMware compatibility list, and I'll put that link in the video description below. Now I'm going to go ahead and press enter to force the install. Another warning message comes back and say, are you sure that you want to go and force install of an unsupported ESXi 8 for this lab environment? Yeah, I do want to do it. So I'm going to go and press enter. The disk is going to be repartitioned, which is cool because there's nothing on that disk. So I'm going to press F11 and we're going to begin this install. The installation is now completed. We need to reboot this ESXi host. So I'm going to go ahead and press enter. Okay, now once ESXi has booted, we're going to go press F2 and then we're going to type in our root password to log in. Now we'll run through this basic config. You can see the first option, we can reconfigure the password if we want. If we move down, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go into this section and configure our management network. If I hit enter on network adapters, you can see the list of physical adapters within this host. We're going to start off by just installing the management IP on VMNIC 0. So just make sure that that's selected. We'll press enter. We'll then move down to VLANs and I'll press enter here. Now within VLANs, you do have the option to enter in a VLAN tag ID. You can enter in a number here from 1 to 4094. However, you only need to do this if you are tagging VLANs. I'm not tagging VLANs on my lab environment, so I'm going to leave this blank. And I'm just going to press escape. Now we'll head down to our IPv4 configuration. I'm going to be setting a static IP. So we'll select set static IPv4 address. We'll go down to IPv4 address and my IP address is going to be 192.168.1.215. I'll then go ahead and type in my subnet. And lastly, my default gateway. I'll go ahead and press enter. We'll move down to IPv6. Now I'm not using IPv6 in my lab. So I'm just going to move up to disable IPv6. Press the spacebar to select it and then press enter. Now we'll head on down to the DNS configuration. And I'm going to be manually entering in my DNS IPs. So I'll press the down arrow. We'll select use the following DNS server. And then I'll go down from my primary DNS server. It is 192.168.1.101. And my secondary DNS server, probably guessed it, is 192.168.1.102. I'm going to go ahead and enter in my host name here. And once you've done that, press enter. We'll go down to custom DNS suffixes. And for my suffix, I'm just going to enter in my DNS, which is vmlab.local. So I'll go ahead, press enter. And then we can press escape to get out of this section. Because we disabled IPv6, it does require a restart of our host. So I'm just going to press Y for yes, and just wait for this host to reboot. Our host is now back from reboot, and you can see on screen that it has set the host name and the IP address there. We'll press F2 and we'll log in with our root credentials. Now we've completed the configure management network. Let's go and take a look at some of the other options. Restart management network is a good tool to use in basic troubleshooting. So if you're experiencing any network issues, you can come in here and restart your management network to see if that resolves it. It's also used to refresh the DHCP address. However, in our lab, we are using a static IP address, so that does not apply here. Next, we've got our test management network. We enter into this section. It's going to run through a couple of tests. The first one is going to be pinging the default gateway. The second one is pinging DNS number 1. Second one, DNS number 2. And then it's going to try and resolve this host name. Now, it's not going to be able to resolve this host name specifically, but if I do add .vmlab.local, which is the fully qualified domain name, it should be able to resolve that. So I'm just going to add that in, and then I'm going to press enter. And what you should see is all 4 of those tests saying okay. If one of these are not showing okay, then please let me know which one it is in the comments below, and I'll try to help you out. We'll press enter to close this screen. And now we're going to take a look at some network restore options. Now, out of the box, you should have a vSwitch 0. However, within the GUI, this looks like a new option where we can create our own standard switch from within here. If you do need to create a new standard switch, simply press enter, give the switch a name, and then select which network adapters you want to belong to this new vSwitch. I'm not going to go ahead and create a new vSwitch now, so I'm just going to escape out of this. Another cool feature is we can create a port group within here. So let's press enter on this. For our port group name, we can type in test-pg, PG meaning port group, and then we simply go down, make sure we've got our vSwitch selected that we want to create the port group on, and then we simply go ahead and press enter. And there we have it, successfully created our port group on vSwitch 0. One thing to note about creating that port group is that we cannot set a VLAN on it within here. We can do that at a later stage. The last option that we can select within this menu is the restored network settings. If I press enter on this, it will set all the network settings back to factory default. So if you really have some serious issues with your host, you can go ahead and use this option, but just remember, it does set it back to factory defaults. I'm going to escape out of this menu and then escape to go back to the previous main menu. We have an option to change our keyboard layout by selecting configure keyboard, and then we move on to troubleshooting options. Let's press enter to go into this menu. First option is to enable the ESXi shell. The ESXi shell basically allows us to use the CLI within the console window here. To demonstrate that, we are going to enable it. So I'm going to press enter. The next option is to enable SSH. And with a program like PuTTY, we can establish a remote connection using the SSH protocol, and we'll jump straight onto the CLI. Modify DCUI timeout is modifying the timeout for the console window that we are on right now. By default, the timeout is 10 minutes. If you want to change that, you can change that right here. Last but not least for this section is restarting your management agents. So this is another good troubleshooting step to use if you are experiencing any network-related issues on your ESXi host. Now I'm going to escape to go back to the main menu. For view system logs, we have an option to look at up to 6 different logs. To do that, we select the view system logs, and then we press the number of the log we want to have a look at. One very famous log to look at is VM kernel. So let's go ahead and press number 2. And live up on screen here is the VM kernel log. We use our arrows, we can move up and down the log file. To get out of it, we press Q. We then move on to view support information, where you can see things as your serial number. I'm running in evaluation mode here, the SSL thumbprint, and various other components. If I go ahead and press page down, I move on to page 2 of that, and you can see the last bit of information that it displays. Last but not least, for our console settings is reset the system configuration to factory defaults. So this is going to reset your whole ESXi host back to factory defaults, where you're going to have to configure everything once again. So if you're in really, really big trouble, then that's one option that you can do. Otherwise, you can also just reinstall the whole thing and start from scratch. I'm going to go ahead and press escape, and that logs us out of our console window. Now we're going to move on to the exciting part of ESXi, and that is establishing a connection through to the web user interface. To establish the connection, I'm going to go ahead and just go to HTTPS and then the IP address. If you have a fully qualified domain name set up for your ESXi host, you can also type that in. So I'm just going to press enter on this URL, and then I'm going to go ahead, log in with our root credentials. First up, it's going to ask us if we want to join the customer experience program. I'm going to go ahead and click OK on that. And here we are in the new design of the ESXi 8 web user interface. Now you might like this web UI interface and the colors that come with it, or like me, you might like it a bit different. So if you do, VMware has given you the option within ESXi 8 to change it and customize it to how you want it. To do that, we go into the help menu, and then we're going to go ahead into about. And here you have the UI preference theme. So you have 3 themes that you can pick. But in addition to that, you also have the customize button on the right side. We click on customize. You can go ahead and select any part of the web UI components listed here, and you can change the color to anything that you want. Not only can you change the color, but you can also use the slider bar to change the opacity as well. Once you've made your changes, you then simply go ahead and click on the enable button. I haven't made any custom changes, but I did go ahead and select the dark theme, and this is what it looks like. In the center of the screen here, we've got a couple of notifications that have popped up, and I'm glad it did pop up because I almost forgot to show you the ESXi shell, which we enabled previously. Let's go back to our console window. To access the ESXi shell, we simply press Alt F1, and here we log in with our root credentials. And this is going to be the same shell that you receive if you SSH into the box as well. I'll type exit, and to get back to the console window, we can press Alt F2. Now we'll minimize the console. Now it's good practice to leave the ESXi shell and the SSH service disabled just for security reasons. I'm going to go ahead and click on this actions button. I'm going to go to services, and then we're going to go disable ESXi shell. And that clears out the warning message. We also have the reminder that we are in evaluation mode and that we don't have any data stores configured, which is understandable because this is just a fresh install. Now, the first screen that you'll arrive at here when you log in is pretty self-explanatory. It does provide some information about the ESXi host, as well as down the bottom right, you do have some performance graphs. We're going to go ahead and click on the Manage button on the left side. First up, we're presented with the advanced settings, where we can select an advanced setting, click on the Edit button, and then go ahead and change it. It's really cool that it also shows the default settings in the middle column here. So if you did make a change and it didn't work or made an issue or something like that, then we can go back and just select the default settings again. Auto Start gives us the option to automatically start a virtual machine, and we can also set a timer to delay the start of that virtual machine as well. Not only can we delay the start of it, but we can also delay the stop of it as well. We can then set where we want our virtual machine swap file to sit. We can create a specific vSwap data store and tell ESXi to store the virtual machine vSwap file within that specific vSwap data store. We can also tell ESXi to keep that vSwap file within the same data store as that virtual machine. Setting the correct time for ESXi is extremely important. And in this section for time and date, we're going to select Edit NTP settings. And you can either manually configure this, which I don't recommend. I'm going to select User Network Time Protocol. And then for NTP Service Startup Policy, we're going to select Start and Stop with the host. And then I'm going to enter in my NTP server, which is basically my primary Active Directory domain controller. Once that is done, I'm going to hit that Save button. Now, if you're using Precision Time Protocol, you can use the Edit PTP settings. However, you need to decide if you want to use NTP or PTP. Let's move along onto the Hardware tab. First up, we have our PCI devices, which are all displayed on the right-hand side. We select Power Management, and then we go on to Change Policy. You can see a few different power policies that are available to us. I'm going to leave mine on Balanced, and we'll click on OK. In the licensing section, this is where we assign our production license key to the ESXi host, and that's where we can take it out of evaluation mode and it will be into production. So if we have a license key with a count of 2, we can assign that to an ESXi host with 2 CPU sockets. Within the Packages tab, these are the ESXi software VIBs that are installed within the ESXi server. You can also see this list in the ESXi CLI by typing in this command up on screen. Within this window, we can also install or update our VIB package by clicking on Install Update. And here we can only point to a URL. So you might have like a HTTP server where we're pulling the VIB file down from, or if you've uploaded that VIB file into a data store that ESXi host can see. Within services, you've probably guessed it, a list of all the services within ESXi and whether they're running or not running, where you can see in the status column. In addition to that, we also have some control where we can stop and start individual services. We're now in security and users and acceptance level. The acceptance level tells us how strict we want to be when we install a VIB file. If we edit these settings, we have basically the strictest one being partner, where we only accept partner and VMware signed certified VIBs, all the way down to the less strict, which is community. Accept all VIBs, even those that are not signed. I'm going to leave mine on the default as partner and click save. Within authentication, we can connect this ESXi host to an Active Directory domain controller. To do that, we click the Join Domain button and we type in our Active Directory domain controller information here. For certificates, we have the default self-signed certificate installed with our ESXi host. And you can also see we have the Import New Certificate button where it is in PEM format. We enter in all the certificate information in PEM format and then we click on Import. Within users, you can see on screen we have our root user already set up. We can then go ahead, we can click on Add User. We can give a username, a password, and then we can decide if we want to allow this user shell access to the ESXi host or not. We then have a bunch of default roles out of the box. The default roles cannot be edited. However, if you wanted to create a custom role, you can select Add Role. You can give the role a name, and then you can select the privileges that you will want to assign to this role down here. Once you've done that, just click Add. Lastly, we have our lockdown mode, and this is how secure you want our ESXi host to be. When we edit the settings, you can see we've got disabled, strict lockdown, and normal lockdown. For my lab environment, I'm just going to leave it on disabled. For our lockdown mode, we can also add a user exception, and that user will be able to bypass that lockdown mode. For monitoring, we have some pretty cool graphs here, which will monitor the performance of your ESXi host. When we drop down the menu, you can see that we can select CPU, memory, network, and disk. However, we are only going to be able to view the last hour of performance metrics. Once you have a few virtual machines set up and you want to have a look at the performance of that virtual machine, we can click on the button that says Select VMs. We select the virtual machine and then we can view the performance information for that virtual machine. Because this is a lab environment, we don't have anything under the hardware tab and system sensors. But normally what you would see here is motherboard, CPU, RAM, disk, fans, and anything really to do with the hardware components of the server. We don't have any storage set up here, so this is blank for my lab environment at this stage. Displayed here is a list of events that have occurred on the ESXi host. We can move from page to page by selecting next page and previous page. We can also search on these events by selecting the search box on the right and typing in the keyword that you want to search for. Tasks display a list of tasks that have run on the system. If you do want to search on a task, let's say, for example, in the task column, I click on the little down arrow here. I click on filter, and then I'm going to select not is equal to, but contains. And then I'm going to type in install, and then we'll press filter. And you can see the list of all the tasks that contain install in the task name. This part's really cool because it lists all the logs within ESXi. And if I scroll down and just want to have a look at the syslog.log file, I can select that. And then on the right-hand side, once again, we can use the search field and just type in a keyword that we want to search the log on. Lastly, we have notifications, and this is any ESXi notifications. They are going to be displayed here. And luckily for the demo, we have one, and that is that no data stores have been configured on the host as of yet. Within the virtual machine section, of course, this is where we create our virtual machines. We can't create any virtual machines at this stage because we haven't mounted any storage to it yet. Our last components here are storage and networking. And within this video, we're not going to be configuring any storage or networking. We are going to be doing all of that in our vCenter 8 video, which is coming up next. And we're not going to be using the GUI to install storage and networking. We're going to be using PowerCLI. If you're not familiar with PowerCLI, I have just recently done a beginner's guide to VMware PowerCLI video. I'm going to put that up on screen here. Click on that link, go check it out, and it'll take you from zero to hero in PowerCLI. Now, because we don't have any storage at this stage, I am going to skip across into the networking section. And if you remember, during the console, we did set up one port group, which was that test-pg. And we can see that test-pg has been created and we can view it right here. Now, remember when we did create that port group, I did say that we could not configure a VLAN on it. To configure a VLAN on this port group, we can click on Edit Settings. Just make sure you got test-pg highlighted. And then we just go to the VLAN ID and we type in the VLAN number that we want to assign to this port group. And simply we just go ahead and click on Save. Now, I'm not going to dive too much into the networking of ESXi within here because we've got the base set up. We've got our management. We can connect into the WebUI. The majority of the configuration is going to be done once we get this vCenter 8 up and running. Now, that brings us to the end of this ESXi 8 installation video. If you enjoyed this content, please leave a big thumbs up. And you'll be notified as soon as this vCenter 8 installation video drops if you are already subscribed. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and you will be notified as soon as that video drops. It is one that you do not want to miss out on. Until then, take care, guys, and bye for now.